Yesterday, Charlie Clifford, sports anchor with NBC5 out of Cincinnati, again, WLWT, again, had a chance to sit down with, of course, Phill Castalini, and they got to talk about a lot of things, too, just about the expectations for the upcoming season. But one of the most notable clips that has everybody talking is their conversation regarding Elly De La Cruz. So we're going to have that for you coming up here in just a second. We're also going to have reaction. Austin Hayes, the Reds addressed the outfield. They added an outfielder. They added a guy.
They sure did. We got our guy.
An all-star.
An all-star.
I mean,
He's an
they
all-star.
technically did it. So we're going to touch on both of those things here as we dive into the Cincinnati Reds. But let's get back again. Charlie Clifford with WLWT had a chance to sit down with Phill Castellini, and he was asked about, well, what's the likelihood, what's the process of getting Elly De La Cruz signed to a long-term extension in Cincinnati? I don't think we should be surprised by how this went. Take a look.
Elly, you shoot out the biggest deal ever to Joey for a non-free agent down the road. Who's to say you wouldn't do that again if things go right?
You know, we would obviously love to make guys like that franchise guys. Yeah. And that's something Nick and his group are going to have to deal with at some point in the future. You know, he's a special player, and you know, only time will tell what will happen. But, you know, where the game is today and the economics around it could be a challenge, but those are decisions that Nick will have to make down the road. But, you know, you just want to take full opportunity of a guy like that. He's a once-in-a-generation kind of player, and the fact that we have him is amazing. Kind of like watching Burrow's career evolve at the Bengals. When a player like that's talked about at the national level regularly, it's just fun when it's your town and you finally have a guy that's in every conversation. Now the goal is to have the team get national attention because we're relevant deep in the season. That's the goal.
Again, that was Charlie Clifford with WLWT, who had a chance to sit down with Phill Castalini. And Elliot, I'll start with you. We shouldn't be surprised by that answer, but there was a lot of stuff wrapped up in that answer. Your takeaway is what? I'm sure that doesn't make you all warm and fuzzy inside regarding the future of Elly in Cincinnati.
No, I've accepted that Elly won't be a Red long term, and I think most Reds fans should have that idea in their mind. Whether it's right or wrong, and the answer is most definitely it's wrong. But, you know, that's the way, unfortunately, the sport is. He's not wrong in that side. You know, he knows how the business works. And again, I can't ask an owner that doesn't have $800 million to spend $800 million. I can't ask him to do it. I don't know what Elly would cost. If you try to get a deal done now, I really don't. He's got the toughest agent in professional sports. I find it strange, though, that he keeps passing it on to Nick Krall, like it's Nick Krall's job to spend his money and you know, utilize his whatever $50 million that he's allowed to spend per year. I don't understand that. You know, if he came out and said that, you know, we don't have Dodger money, we don't have Yankee money, we're the Cincinnati Reds, and that's the way it is, I would feel a little bit better. Not better in terms of, you know, I feel all warm and fuzzy, but better in the fact that at least he's being honest. Like it seems like he was trying to put most of the blame there on Nick Krall, and I don't think that that's the story. The story is there are owners that have money in this league, and there are owners that don't have money. The owners that don't have money can't extend guys like Elly De La Cruz. We have one of those owners. So yeah. I that's my takeaway. I'm not shocked by any of it. I get it. It's just a brutal blow. It just makes me want to take the next 4 years or whatever it is, 4 years, and then maybe trade him, but 4 years and sit down and say, you know what, we got him for 4. Let's maybe try to do something magical in those 4.
That's exactly where I'm at. And I know we're going to talk about it. We're probably going to talk about it a lot over the next couple of years and over the summer and everything like that. Every great play he makes, we'll talk about whether or not we can sign him and how much that affects his value. And it's going to be hell. But we have him for 4 years, and he's an electric player, and we get to watch him, and that's going to be really, really fun. And I'm going to try not to think about the whole free agency offseason in 2029 when he's not a Red anymore, because he's not going to be a Red anymore. We're not going to get it done long term unless, and we talked about it briefly yesterday, there's a massive holdout where small market teams drastically change the way contracts are done by using the negotiating power they have within an expiring CBA to give us a chance. And then in that case, if you're Elly De La Cruz and we haven't won in the 4 years that you're here, and you can take whatever it is, $300 million everywhere. Everyone can give you the same contract. Why would you stay if we haven't won?
Yeah.
So we need to look at this as a window with him right now to prove to him and to everyone else that we can win with him. Because if you can't win in these 4 years, what's the incentive on his part to sign and stay? In the next decade, we're going to give you a chance to win. Why couldn't you do it when I was making less money? So I think these next 4 years are just as big for us if we don't have him as they are for our chances to sign him. But I'm not entirely optimistic that they're ever going to get it done. 0% chance in the current setup of contracts.
I still go back to when we had Tommy Thraw on, and Tommy was just very open about his thoughts on that. And the reason that caught my attention is this is no disrespect to Tommy or anybody, but those guys aren't allowed to be open and honest. And part of me just wonders is if they have been directed to be open and honest, because we don't want to set expectations of this actually happening. And you almost wonder if that's what this approach is, because Phill Castalini, although we're saying he's tiptoeing around it, I don't think he was. I think he was blatantly just telling us, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. And that's why he talked about enjoying the time that we have while he's here and all of that. I feel like the Reds front office approach is, hey, media members around, within the organization, don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to spare the feelings of the Reds fans. We cannot set up. I think fans will be more angry if we spend the next 4 years thinking that it can be done and it not happening than if we spend the next 4 years knowing we only get 3 to 4 years and it happens. We'll be upset, but we kind of knew it was coming, if that makes sense. So I kind of understand, I wish they'd be a little bit more blunt and a little bit more truthful, but I would appreciate it more if they just came out and said, yes, this probably is not going to be likely. But again, the unknowns, like you guys talked about with the collective bargaining agreement and what could shift the direction of baseball at that point, maybe it opens the door for it. But I almost feel like the reason everyone's been so comfortable saying it's not going to happen is because they've been instructed to be open and blunt about it because of the fact we don't want to get Reds fans' hopes up.
I think that definitely plays a role, and we talked about it with the Bengals all year. We talked about it with the Reds last year. Expectations are always the thing that make you feel worse when you don't live up to them. So if they can continue to chip away at that base of expectations, maybe Reds fans won't be as mad when he inevitably walks out the door. Because I think if you did string Reds fans along for 4 or 5 years and then you don't give him a reasonable offer, I think they're a lot more mad. They'll be very mad. But I think they're a lot more mad when he inevitably leaves. So this might be a preemptive saving face for the Castellinis and really the Reds as a whole. I think the hardest conversation. I think the hardest conversation to have, and one that's going to come up if and when we realize we really can't sign him, is when do you move him? Because you can't sit and let him walk for free. Not this talent. If you can't keep him, you got to get something for him. And I keep going back to what the Nationals did and where they're at now. And obviously they're not in the best spot, one of the worst teams in baseball. But they have a decent young core, and that all came over in the Juan Soto trade. So you have to be able to steal someone's entire farm, and it has to be really, really good players if you're going to move Elly De La Cruz, because you can't just let a guy like that walk out of the building and sign with the Dodgers for $500 million, $700 million, or whatever it'll be at that point. You have to get something for him. So if the Reds can't extend him, we're going to have that tough conversation at some point too.
Yeah, like when I thought, with that being said too, if we expect that they're not going to keep him, it's going to hurt, but it won't hurt as bad as if we're being strung along and we think that it's going to happen. I'm not comparing Elly De La Cruz to T. Higgins, but these are two very popular players within each respective fan bases of these teams. I think Bengals fans had accepted that this past season was going to be the last season of T. Higgins. I think what's going to happen now is if T is ultimately gone after this, off season, I think it's going to anger more Bengals fans because of the chatter down the last month of the season where we got to do whatever we got to do to keep him. We're going to have those conversations. We need T. Higgins. I think there's going to be more Bengals fans who are upset with the departure of T if it happens because of that than what they would have been a month and a half, 2 months ago when I felt like everyone had kind of universally just accepted it, if that makes sense. So I think that's why the Reds have this approach when it's all said and done. And man, we talk about Bengals just letting your players just go and not extending them. This is that, but on steroids, just because of the fact that Elly is just a megastar at this point. So, but you're right. We're doing it too. We're focusing on the negative of him not being here in 4 years. That's a long time. That's a long time. We have this upcoming season. And by the way, this is the most improved team in baseball, apparently. And they were the most improved team in baseball yesterday at this time before they made an additional move. They addressed the outfield, guys. They have fixed all their problems, right? This team has no holes, correct? Austin Hayes, now a Cincinnati Red. How do we feel about that? That literally happened minutes after we ended the show yesterday after talking a lot of Cincinnati Reds, of course, and their offseason. They've been looked at as the most improved team in baseball by a lot of national media out there. Buster Olney, Dan O'Dowd, and guys like that with the MLB Network. What did you think? What did you react to when you saw this news yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it's fine.
We got our outfielder.
Listen, Austin Hayes is a solid player for what the Reds can afford. I think he makes the outfield a little bit better. I know there were some comparisons, and they were talking about it on Chatterbox Reds yesterday afternoon. Is it going to be another Tommy Pham, Will Myers situation? I think Craig was the one who brought it up. I could be wrong. Austin Hayes is 29. The other guys were well into their 30s. When they came to Cincinnati. I think this is a little bit of a different situation. Jacob mentioned it. He is an all-star. He does hit lefties very, very well. And I do think there's a chance if he has to, he can play every day in right field. Not that I'm saying that will happen, because I do think Jake Fraley is a guy that's being slept on a little bit. Bad year last year. I think Jake Fraley can pick it up to be at least what we need him to be, and that is a pretty solid hitter against right-handed pitching. I'm excited. I'm starting to get excited. I would have liked them to do a little bit more. I think most Reds fans would probably agree that you expected a little bit more. I'm still a little bit concerned about the bullpen. We haven't really talked about the bullpen at all this entire offseason. Not a ton of upgrades there if you don't count, maybe the possibility of Graham Ashcraft moving to the bullpen and a couple other pieces here and there. But I feel okay. I feel ready to roll for this Reds season. I mean, if you had to ask me and you have to say, Elliot, you have to bet everything in your savings account on whether or not it's going to go over or under 78.5 wins, then I'd still probably take the under. But it's getting close. I think that there's a possibility that the Reds are going to have a higher base than they did last year. I think the ceiling's probably right around the same spot, and I think Kirby was talking about this yesterday too. I think the ceiling's right around the same spot, and I think the floor has been raised a little bit. So for whatever that's worth, I do think the Reds have improved. And I think, if you're able to take a couple wins here in the division, if you're able to win against the Brewers a couple times, maybe, then yeah, I think you'll have a fighting chance in the NL Central and maybe sneak into the playoffs. But that's probably the highest this team could possibly go, 86 wins. Maybe sneaking in via the wild card or possibly winning the division in a really bad down year for the NL Central.
I think we were all hoping for this offseason to give us ceiling-raising moves. That was the plan and the goal, and when we were talking about Anthony Santander and Teoscar Hernandez and trading for Luis Robert or Garrett Crochet or any of those names we were throwing around in the early offseason, those are ceiling-raising moves. Those are we get from talking about a 90-win ball club right now if we make some of those moves. We didn't do any of that. We raised the floor, and that does help. That helps because we saw what happens when you scrape that floor last year.
Yeah.
And it was really low for the Reds. Raising that floor is going to help the Reds maybe more throughout a season than one or two of those big-time moves, but it just doesn't feel like they did enough. It doesn't feel like they're going all the way in on this window if we really don't think we can re-sign Elly De La Cruz. When's the next chance you have to have a player like that? And to drag your feet with Gavin Lux, Brady Singer, Jose Trevino, Austin Hayes offseason, I just don't know if that's good enough. And to not give everything you can into these couple of years where you have a generational shortstop, I just don't know how you can justify that. And for them to say at the start of the offseason, Elliot said it a billion times, and I hear it in my sleep, and Nick Kroll saying that we need an outfielder at the start of the offseason. Austin Hayes is the outfielder signing championship teams make after they sign their outfielder. You sign him to come off the bench, be a guy against the lefty bats, a situational hitter. That's the guy you signed to be a plus piece to your offseason. He is our outfielder, which we said was the biggest need of the offseason. It's a 1-year, $5 million deal. Like, maybe he's great. Maybe he's 2023 Austin Hayes. And that would be incredible for the Reds, and that would raise the ceiling of this team pretty drastically. But I just don't love that all the signings we've made this offseason have been gambles. And I see people in the chat saying, well, who did you want? Who did you want if you didn't want these guys? I don't know. I would have liked the Reds to make bigger swings. And I know that that's probably, not realistic and stuff that they would never do. But I don't like grading the Reds on a Reds curve. I like grading the Reds on an MLB curve. And if you're talking about this offseason with this core, it's not good enough for the other teams that would be trying to win, but we give them an escape because they're the Reds. And like Elliot said, some owners don't have enough money to pay those big contracts, and we're one of those owners. So we give them a pass, but it's just not enough, I don't think. Hope I'm wrong. Hope we win 90 games. Hope we win the Central. Hope we get into the playoffs. But I just have a tough time believing that these additions are going to be enough to push the Reds over the edge.
I saw a tweet yesterday from Lance McAllister with the 700 WLW, and he brought up a good point saying, you may not be in love with all these names with the Gavin Lux, obviously, and you had Brady Singer, and you bring in an Austin Hayes, and obviously you look at the names that they've added, but every single one of these names that they have added is an upgrade over a deficiency that this team had last season. So
That's a good point.
Every at-bat that Gavin Lux gets is at-bats taken away from guys that we deemed not MLB ball players last year. So, and Brady Singer, every pitch that he throws is a pitch that he is taking from somebody that we didn't deem to be good enough or should not be pitching for the Reds in 2023 or 2024. So when I read that from that perspective, I'm like, okay, he's not wrong. That is a good way, a positive spin to put on it, if you will. The other thing I thought about too is, let's say that the Reds would have got a Santander or a big, Teoscar Hernandez. If they get a name like that, they're probably not making many other moves after that. And you got to ask yourself, are we wanting the flashy big move to make us feel like they've elevated this roster? Or do you want a couple of solid moves that I think actually benefit this roster more than just one Teoscar Hernandez? Like, I think when you look at Austin Hayes with Brady Singer, with a Gavin Lux, and with the changes that they've made there, I think that improves this team more than if they would have just signed a Teoscar Hernandez. Now you could say,
why are they mutually exclusive though?
I
know they are, but why?
And that's a fair counterpoint. But knowing how they operate, this goes back to our point yesterday. There's things that we know how the Bengals operate, and a lot of opinions are based on how we know they operate versus how they should. How the Reds should do this is Teoscar Hernandez or a Santander with these moves, but we know that's not how they operate. So we knew it was either going to be one or the other, or feel like it would have been one or the other, but it shouldn't be. I'm with you, Jake. It should have been a Teoscar Hernandez with the Brady Singer, with the Gavin Lux, and guys like that. That just obviously hasn't been the case.
No, and that was never going to happen. And I think that's something that we fell into early in the offseason, is starting to believe a little bit that it might. And that's the only reason we feel the way we do now about the offseason, because it's a good offseason. They helped the places they needed to help. It's just, going back to the Elly conversation, if we had him locked up for 15 years, I wouldn't feel as urgent. I feel like you have him for 4, and it's going to be the best chance to win anything that I'm going to have in my life, probably. So hopefully they can kick it into gear, and maybe it's enough. Maybe, a lot of people smarter than me when it comes to baseball say it's enough. So hopefully they're right.
So here's the other thing too. When we talk about these changes, we're not like enamored by the name of a Gavin Lux or a Austin Hayes or what have you, but sometimes when you see what the lineup is going to look like, it might make you feel a little bit more excited. And I know that was because yesterday I'm like, Austin Hayes, that's solid. That's not the name we kind of wanted. That's not the level, the star name that we were wanting or expecting. But then when you look at the lineup and how it's going to look against lefties and against righties, all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, well, man, Austin Hayes, it's a very good bat that they're adding to the lineup. But when you look at what the potential lineup could be, he's kind of hitting more towards the bottom. You see how much improved this lineup actually is when it's all said and done. I'm assuming it was Kirby, someone with Chatterbox yesterday. I'm going to say it was Kirby. If it was someone else, my apologies. Put together what a lineup with the current roster as is, what a lineup versus lefties would look like versus a lineup versus righties. We'll pop that up on the screen for those watching on Chatterbox right now, but this is basically what it would look like. I mean, this is versus left-handed pitching. I mean, with everyone healthy, Elly De La Cruz leading off, Matt McClain batting second, Tyler Stevenson, who was the most consistent Red last year that I think was very undervalued. And then, of course, Spencer Steer, I don't think makes everyone feel warm and fuzzy in the cleanup spot there. But again, Candelario, Austin Hayes, Christian Encarnacion Strand, Santiago Espinal, and Stuart Fairchild down there at the bottom. And then you see the depth pieces from the bench. We forget about Trevino that was added for depth at the catcher position. I kind of like that lineup against lefties.
I think something that a lot of us are missing or glossing over or just putting on the back of our brains is maybe we do have that $15 million free agency signing, and maybe it's just Jeimer Candelario playing like it this year.
Yeah.
If he raises his level of play to what he was expected to be when we signed him last year, then this lineup looks a lot better than it does if he's not. So I think it goes back to the point we've talked about pretty extensively throughout this whole offseason. Whatever moves we could make, whatever moves we would make, The Reds rely on the guys they have in their locker room raising their level of play, and that's the guys we had last year. It's Elly and McLean being all-stars in the middle of the infield. It's Spencer Steer playing at an everyday level in left. It's Jeimer Candelario not being old and slow and hurt every game, and having a on-base percentage preferably above the water, and Christian Encarnacion-Strand not getting hurt. I think it's all those guys. Austin Hayes can be as good as Austin Hayes could be. If the guys we had last year aren't good enough, we aren't going to be good enough.
Yeah, and I think there's one key for the Reds' success in 2025. There's one, and that's health. They have to be healthy.
Yeah.
You have to get 120 games at least out of Matt McLean. You got to get at least 140 games out of Elly De La Cruz. Elly De La Cruz, up until this point, has been about as healthy as you could be with the aggressive nature of his baseball style. I respect the hell out of it. That's probably my favorite part of Elly's game so far, is that the guy plays every single game.
Yeah.
Spencer Steers, say whatever you want about him. He doesn't miss time. You need this team to be healthy, because you look at the bench and it's like, I don't know if that's good enough. We don't know if that's going to be good enough to win games without him. We don't have the luxury of losing Bryce Harper for 2 months. We can't lose Mookie Betts for a month and a half. You have to have every single one of these players be ready and available for an entire 5-6 month baseball season. That's what you need. And if that's not the case, if we're going to get injured time and time again this year, I have a hard time believing they're going to be good enough to compete. And you can say, well, Elliot, any team that gets hurt is not going to be able to compete. The Reds, I feel like it's a little bit more true based on the fact that our depth is a little bit different than the teams with $800 trillion payrolls. It's a little bit different.
Speaking of that depth, we have some breaking news that'll aid this Reds offseason. Veteran pitcher Wade Miley signing a minor league deal to returon to the club, with eyes on returning from Tommy John surgery in mid to late May.
How about that?
That's fun.
I like that.
No-hitter Wade Miley.
Wade Miley. I was at that no-hitter in Cleveland. I went to Cleveland for that no-hitter. How about that? You know what? I actually like that move. That's
Gordon
a good
Whitmire
move.
breaking the news. Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I like bringing guys back that are fun to watch.
Yeah, and he obviously had that relationship with Tucker Barnhart. Those two went hand in hand together. No Tucker Barnhart, obviously, but yeah, that was the last no-hitter for the Reds, correct? Like that goes back a bit, but I like it. That's a solid move right there that I don't think is pushing him over the edge. But if he comes back in mid-May and can return to form like he was 2 years ago, that's a solid get for the Reds to add depth to the pitch.
Certainly can't complain.